Hello, now we are after the US elections, and on November 4th we have no idea what will be the result. The US election is very much contested, and it could be that there is a new incoming president, Joe Biden, but it can also not be ruled out that, at least based on the interim results, that President Trump has been reelected. In any case, we see that there is a deep political polarization in the United States, and that means that the ability of the US to provide the traditional international leadership is rather weakened. We have already witnessed this in the Corona world recession. That was the first time that the United States, in an international Western economic recession, was not visible with its leadership. So the EU can, of course, not simply replace this US leadership, although it is clear from the perspective of the Western world that there is need for leadership in the 21st century with the enhanced systemic competition between the US, Europe, and China, or we might say Asia. So what is also remarkable is that the structural populism in the US is well and alive. That means that there's a lot of political wishful thinking, protectionism, and new nationalism, which shapes the US political system. And whether or not Trump is reelected, there is a structural populism problem in the US, as I have emphasized in my book, The Global Trump, which I had presented, by the way, earlier this year in Washington, D.C. at Georgetown University and at UC Berkeley. That was in February. And in this book I have emphasized the finding that there is an enormous increase of economic inequality in the US in the period 1981 to 2015-16. So the share of the lower half of the income earners has fallen from 21% in 1981 to about 13% in 2015-16. Compare this to Western Europe, where the situation really is different, because here we have seen a decline only from 22 to 20%. So in the United States, according to my analysis, there is the lower half of the income earners who are deeply disappointed, frustrated, and this frustration, unfortunately, is likely to continue because survey research from my colleague McCall and her Swedish co-author Lind, they show that a relative majority of the respondents in the US hold the view that there is an increasing and unfair inequality in the US, but who is supposed to correct this? The answer of this relative majority is big companies should correct this. This is absolutely illusionary. In a shareholder value economy, in a shareholder economy such as the US, you will not witness that managers decide that they want to cut their remuneration by 10% and maybe increase that in the low wage brackets by 10 or 15%. So here a new President Biden, of course, could bring some major changes in the sense that the tax policy of a Democratic president certainly would look different than what you would see with President Trump. And on the other hand, there is no broad view in the United States compared to EU countries that government should be the decisive actor in reducing economic inequality. And here, I must say, the US government indeed could do a few things, not just raising the tax rates for the very rich, but also higher expenditures on social policy, so higher social expenditures, including for health care. On the other hand, the health system reform, the health insurance reform in the US is still incomplete. In Europe, we have 99% coverage of the population by the health insurance system. And in this current pandemic, of course, that's very, very important in the US. The share of those without health insurance has increased from 11% of the population under the Obama administration to 13% under the Trump administration in 2019 and further in 2020 when so many Americans lost their jobs. So if there is a new President Biden, it would be very useful to have a transatlantic reform dialogue that is to encourage the US political system to consider some of the reform options based on some models here in Europe, or maybe both the US and the EU might want to take a closer look at the health insurance system in Singapore, where life expectancy is very high as in Europe, and where expenditures on health is lower than in the US. So in the United States, there is a critical point, namely that healthcare expenditures is 1/3 higher than in the EU. So that means health expenditures relative to national income in the US is 18%, in Germany and France it's around 12%. The critical points here are actually that life expectancy in Western Europe is higher than in the US and infant mortality is lower. So that brings me then to an important point which concerns a misperception of an alleged US economic lead. So you can read, for instance, in a paper of the Council of Economic Advisors from 2018, or also in the annual report, that the US has a big lead in per capita income for the year 2016. Yes, to some extent, this comparison in this case with the Nordic countries in Europe seems to be correct at first sight, but if you take a closer look and if you adopt a perspective which makes sense, and this would be a lifetime consumption or a lifetime effective income perspective, then the finding in my analysis clearly says that the lifetime effective income in the US, in Germany and France are roughly the same. The point is not just that Europeans have a higher life expectancy, but of course I have corrected in this comparison the figures for the relatively high extra expenditures in the US, and I also have taken into account the value of the extra leisure time which the Europeans are enjoying. So from that perspective, the social market economy of Western European countries has certainly a big advantage. And I would emphasize, and do not forget, that also the infant mortality in Western European or also in Scandinavian countries and Nordic countries is much lower than in the US. If the United States would have the low infant mortality of Germany and France, then within 60 years there would be an additional 50 million Americans as part of a large population. So the problems in the US health system have therefore serious implications. Whatever president we will get in the United States based on the final results, there is a need of cooperation of Germany with the United States or of the EU with the United States. And that is not just referring to economics, but also to defense and other fields. I think there will be in any case a challenge for the EU, namely that ongoing trade conflicts between the US and China will have negative spillover effects here on the EU. And lack of US leadership certainly is also not good for the economic post-corona recovery. There's no reason from a European perspective to have any complaints. Voters decide, and of course we should respect this. On the other hand, the EU should consider to move forward with careful integration steps, and this can be a good model for other regions in the world economy. Here, Germany and France could become more active. They should certainly also involve other EU countries, Netherlands, Austria, and whoever wants to be part of more EU integration. This EU integration should deliver economic benefits for the people in the EU, and it is clear that EU integration will not work if there are not visible benefits, and that also means that one has to better explain what is the role of EU integration and what are really benefits which are derived from economic integration, from free trade, from a rules-based international system, and so on. There will be one particular challenge in climate policy. So if the United States would be rather unwilling to reconsider to come on board for the Paris Climate Convention, then EU countries would have to consider to launch some G20 or G19 initiative. That would be quite important for the next years. So on the other hand, final point, the structural populism in the US remains a challenge, and in the EU the situation is rather different. The income inequality is not as strong. One should, on the other hand, also have no illusions that populist forces of the US will try to support and push the expansion of populism in Europe as well. In the end, the export of the social market economy model is probably the best thing the Europeans can do in the coming years, and this is an encouraging note on this morning.